Thematically, this is a book about Harry Dresden not being the bad guy that everybody thinks he is. Hey Booktube, it's V, and today we are discussing Stormfront, which is the first book in the Dresden Files by Jim Butcher. Down in the description, there are going to be timestamps for each different section in this video because I know it's going to be very, very long. First, I'm going to give a spoiler-free review, sort of a blurb about the Dresdenverse to anybody who doesn't know what I'm talking about right now. Then we're going to discuss the thematic elements of the story through book 1. And finally, we're going to talk fan theories, and there's going to be a big old spoiler warning in advance for literally everything, because we are going to try to tie in book 1 to literally everything else that happens in the series and try to figure out what it tells us about the endgame for the Dresden Files. Basically, no spoilers, book spoilers, everything spoilers. I'm kind of confusing myself at this point. So let's get started. Let's get a very quick spoiler-free review out of the way. Dresden Files is the series that pretty much anybody will recommend to you if you say that you want to get into urban fantasy. We're about 17 books into this series at this point, and there's going to be about 25 books total. Now, this includes a big apocalyptic trilogy, or a BAT, to sort of top it all off at the end. So even though we're really close, there's still a lot left in the series to be written. Plus, Jim Butcher is writing a book for one of his other series right now, so if you just want to, spend a year reading Dresden Files, you can definitely catch up. This bandwagon is not full, not by a long shot, which I'm also pretty sure is what Jim Butcher goes by on the internet. Stormfront is the first book in this series about a wizard private eye named Harry Dresden. He's the only publicly practicing wizarding entity in the city of Chicago. You can find him in the Yellow Pages. In this book, Harry has to solve a grisly crime before he takes the blame for it with the White Council, which is this governing body of wizards that enforces all the laws of magic, and right now they think he broke one. His head's literally on the line here. This story has cops who need him but don't trust him, mobsters who are scarier than anything that goes bump in the night, vampires who are only pretty on the outside, and a spirit of intellect named Bob the Skull, who while he lives in a skull, always has his mind in the gutter. Even though the series is beloved by many, myself included, that's why I'm doing a reread right now, Stormfront and its sequel, Full Moon, are generally considered to be the weakest books in the entire series. And in my personal opinion, this series gets exponentially better once you start reading the first chapter of book 3. Stormfront, which is the book we're talking about today, and its sequel, Full Moon, are generally considered to be backstory type books, and you don't necessarily have to read them to jump into the Dresden Files books, but I would recommend that you at least try to get through them. But no matter how you choose to do it, you should definitely read the Dresden Files. Now, if you haven't read the Dresden Files, I would highly suggest that you leave because I'm about to talk about everything that happens in book 1 and all my thoughts on it. So, spoiler warning for book 1. Let's get on it. A lot of discussion videos simply rehash the plot and add commentary. Nothing against that approach, but I'd really like to discuss the more thematic elements of Stormfront. We're going to talk about a bunch of the different archetypes that inspired this story, and also sort of analyze this book the way that your lit teacher might have, except this is going to be fun. I'm leaving some pretty detailed timestamps, or chapters as the cool kids are calling them now apparently, in the description so you can skip around if you get bored. And please, if you do skip around or if you don't like this video, leave me a comment down below so that I can learn from it. This is a new series and I'm intending to do a video on pretty much every single book in the Dresden Files, and I'm still trying to figure out how I want to do that, so help me out here. Our story begins with a 25-ish-year-old Harry Dresden, who like many of us is struggling to get his freelance wizarding business off the ground and make rent. Harry's main source of income comes from helping the Special Investigations Unit of the Chicago PD. He assists them on crimes of a supernatural nature. And we all know what happens. When two lovers are discovered with their hearts literally ripped out of their chests, Harry's on the case. From the start, we know that we are in for a book that tries to be hard-boiled detective noir with a twist. Like most detective noir stories, Harry Dresden is a normal guy, or at least as normal as you can be while being a wizard, who through no fault of his own gets dragged into a complex and dangerous mystery that he has to solve in order to save himself. And because the authorities are, despite their best efforts, useless. Sad face. His closest associate, Lieutenant Murphy, is a no-nonsense cop who doesn't quite trust him, even though her entire job in keeping Chicago safe depends on Harry's help. Harry and Murphy's relationship in the book isn't terribly close. Murphy is basically married to her job, and most of her interaction with Dresden is yelling at him because she's under a lot of pressure to close this case. She leans heavily on Dresden because he's the only one with the background to figure out what's truly going on and save her job. Did I mention she loves her job? Despite working together in the past, she really doesn't trust him. She doesn't truly understand the supernatural aspect of her world, and Harry doesn't make it any easier on her by trying to keep her out of the loop on all supernatural matters. Even though it's supposedly for her own protection, it still isn't a great call on Harry's part. After all, when you're the only person who can possibly figure out how to commit a certain kind of crime, people get suspicious. So when we got to the part in the story where Murphy is going to arrest Dresden and they have to fight that scorpion thing in the elevator, he kind of had it coming. One thing that a lot of readers don't like about the Dresden Files is that, especially at the beginning, Harry can kind of be a chauvinistic pig. I mean, a practitioner of chivalry. This character flaw of his is totally a callback to the private investigator archetype that his character is partially based off of. No spoilers, but this characteristic of his personality falls off a lot as the series progresses, and I don't think that if you have a problem with it in the beginning, that it's something that you're going to have a problem with enough to quit the series. But hey, everybody's different. Leave me a comment down below if I'm wrong, because I know you will. You're on the internet. You have an opinion. You're going to leave a nasty comment, aren't you? Harry just isn't like other private investigators because he's a wizard, but he still follows the private eye archetype pretty closely. His first case, a beautiful wife asking him to find her missing husband, and it quickly spiraling into a confrontation with players in organized crime, is almost cliche at this point. Another mainstay of this genre is Madame Bianca, the vampire, a character who is both a vampire and an example of the vamp archetype, which is similar to the femme fatale, but is ultimately more forward in her advances. If you don't know what I mean, she's got the subtlety of Cardi B. Early in their conversation at her mansion, Bianca is charming and sexy and flirty, and she tries to use that to distract Dresden from asking her questions. However, she quickly turns violent, and Harry has to use light in order to survive that encounter, because under that flesh mask, she is just this bat and monster creature thing, and it's kind of gross. This wins her pride, and she's got a lot of it. How do we know that? It's all in the way that Harry describes her stuff. Harry describes Bianca's home as he's led through it to her study for their meeting. And it's all dark wood, clawfoot furniture, and leather upholstery and books. She takes pride in her sexy, luxe, and very powerful appearance, and her home reflects that. Harry's definitely made an enemy here. But it's a nice, supernaturally spiced callback to the private eye meets vamp pairing historically seen in detective novels. One thing that this book does an amazing job of is combining plot with world building. It's the first book where I've been on the edge of my seat during an info dump. We've already talked about Bianca showing us who she is through the furnishings in her home. But the best example of an info dump being engaging and exciting is when Harry is setting up the trap for Toot Toot, and Morgan comes out accusing him of breaking the laws of magic. As Harry sets the trap for Toot Toot, he literally walks us through the magic that he's using and why it has to work this way. But instead of the lore taking us out of the story, it just draws us in because it's part of the action. Harry moves along with his trap, plot moves forward, everybody's happy. With a line like, Harry Blackstone Copperfield Dresden. Irresponsible use of true names for summoning and binding others to your will violates the fourth law of magic. The man intoned. I remind you that you are under the doom of Damocles. No further violations of the law will be tolerated. The sentence for further violation is death, by sword, to be carried out at once. Morgan goes off on Harry, and as they try to lawyer it out, we learn that there are laws of magic and a white council to govern them. And forcing your will on others is a really bad idea if they're human, but it doesn't really matter if the person you're forcing your will on is not human. Like Morgan, my blood was definitely pumping during this scene, because there were stakes to this encounter. Morgan had the potential to catch Harry breaking the laws of magic and end him on the spot. But Harry talks his way out of trouble. Basically, Jim Butcher takes an info dump and turns it into a political battle. And it's great. This might seem like it belongs in the next section, but we're keeping this strictly book one. Thematically, this is a book about Harry Dresden not being the bad guy that everybody thinks he is. Morgan is described as someone who doesn't really think for himself a lot. He just latches on to the ideas that the White Council puts in his head. He is their lapdog after all. Of course, since this book is kind of from Harry's point of view, we know that he is biased by previous negative experiences and probably doesn't know everything that the White Council knows. But we work with what we have. Morgan, and in turn the council, think that Harry's dangerous. He's got the doom of Damocles over him from a previous incident, so we know that the council doesn't trust him. And he's the number one suspect whenever some dark, nasty magic happens in his general vicinity. After the showdown with Victor Sells, Morgan of all people is the person who saves Harry. And because he's honor-bound to do it, Morgan talks to the White Council on Harry's behalf and gets them to lift the doom from him. You know, as a thank you. There's actually an ancient story about the Sword of Damocles. In this story, a man named Damocles tells his king that the king is very fortunate to have the luxury of his position. The king's like, hey, you want to trade? And Damocles is like, sure. So the king decides to switch places with Damocles. But before he does that, he takes a sword and he ties it over the throne with a single horsehair to symbolize how much pressure he's under, because nobody comes to power without acquiring a lot of enemies. In the Dresden verse, the Doom of Damocles is like the wizard version of probation, where if you're suspected of breaking the laws of magic, you can find yourself in mortal danger at any moment. Harry might have had the doom lifted off of him by the White Council, but with his magical lifestyle and line of work, he's bound to make enemies. And he's still going to find himself in dangerous circumstances even if Morgan is not stalking him. We also see that it's pretty easy for magical practitioners to go to the dark side. Victor Sells started his three-eye operation with the best of intentions, to support his family, and he quickly spiraled into warlock territory. For anybody who doesn't remember, a warlock in the Dresden universe is like an evil wizard. This is probably why Harry's not trusted in the magical community. He's already considered a little bit tainted, and near the end of the book he even debates with himself on whether or not he should just torch Victor Sell's place from afar rather than go and confront him in person. But Harry has something inside him, the small feminine hands that make him notice his pentacle amulet. These hands guide him to a more lawful good solution. Harry might not be the bad guy that people think he is, but he could go warlock at any moment if he doesn't have the right safeguards. And that's probably why the White Council's nervous. Honestly, I'd really love to get a story from their perspective, like even just a short story. This next part is going to sound kind of harsh, but I think it provides a lot of context to where Jim Butcher was in his writing career and why a lot of hardcore Dresden fans have a hard time with this book. Stormfront feels a bit formulaic, very noir and very monster of the week. Harry seems to move linearly from one clue to another, and all the little things that happen at the beginning of the story come back later. There's nothing wrong with placing clues at the beginning of the story. In fact, that's what good writers do. But there aren't really any red herrings or anything to obfuscate what's important and what's not for later. Stormfront is what I call a fun read because even though it's not going to win a literary prize anytime soon, it's still enjoyable. You can tell that the author was still learning the ropes of his craft. Pretty much every interview he gives, Jim talks about how he was a grad student with a no-nonsense writing teacher who tore his work apart a lot. He thinks she's full of it, so he decides to prove her wrong by doing everything that she told him to do and showing him what a mess it is. And then he follows her instructions, and she's like, hey, this will sell. And he's like, what? To his surprise, she reads the first part of his story, likes it, and then tells him to come back and outline the rest of the series for when they talk next time. Which is how we got a story that knows exactly where it's going right from the very beginning. Which is what makes stories like Gravity Falls so good. Because even though they got really, really popular, instead of trying to go the Lost track where they just pump out more and more until people get sick of it, that series had a definite beginning, middle, and end, and I think that it made the story a lot stronger for it. Dresden Files is basically doing the same thing, and that is a huge, huge positive in its favor, even if it was outlined by a noob. Now the story sounds way better when Jim tells it because he's a best-selling author and I'm just some person on the internet, but I think it's an important story to tell. It shows that the criticism that the first two books have of being kind of amateurish is true. But that's not a bad thing. Everybody has to start somewhere, and we got the rest of the series out of the deal, so I'm okay with that. If you had trouble with this book, I promise it gets better in book 3. Please just make it to book 3. This video is the first in my Dresden reread series. So if you've read past Stormfront, then go check out the playlist of the rest of the series, assuming you've gotten that far when you're watching this. If you haven't read past Stormfront, thanks for watching, and leave a like, comment, and subscribe to me on your way out. Turn on all notifications so that YouTube actually tells you when I upload videos. Yeah, it's important. Now we are transitioning into the part of the video where I go into spoilers for the entire series and how Stormfront sort of fits into everything. This is fan theories and it's going to be a lot of fun, but if you don't want spoilers, you need to go right now. Are they gone? Good. Time to talk about fan theories and how things that are set up for 17 books down in the series all started here in book 1. With an author who didn't necessarily know what he was doing. As of this recording, the most recent Dresden Files book that's out is Battleground. So if you haven't read through Battleground, go away. Here's a not-so-comprehensive list of all the things in this book that are important later on in the story. Bianca. We all know what goes down at her party in Great Peril. And about how she held a grudge against Harry for years because she blamed him for making her so distraught that she ate one of her people. Way to misplace the blame there, you petty Betty. Later on in the series, we learn that the Red Court is mostly infected. When I say infected, I of course mean they are under the control or being manipulated by Nemesis, or He Who Walks Beside. You know, one of the 3 walkers, the outsiders, the big baddies that represent the old ones who are the gods who really just want to take over the world again because apparently they don't get no respect where they are. But the question becomes, since we know that the Red Court was infected, was Bianca infected as soon as Stormfront hit, or did that happen later, or did it happen at all? Probably the first clue to the whole the vampire courts were infected is that when Duke Ortega and Harry had that fight in Death Mask, where they had to push a ball at each other that would end the person who lost, that ball was made from something that was from the outside. Bianca's party in Great Peril ends up infecting the Winter Court via the blade that Lee received. Faravax also received some gold, and we don't know if it's tainted yet. But our favorite dragon put his gold in a bank, as dragons do, that's run by Johnny Marcone, so I don't know how much contact he has with that or if it's still trying to infect him. But let's get back to Bianca. One of the other important objectives of the party was to force Harry to break the rules of hospitality, so that Bianca could get revenge on him for what happened between them and Stormfront. After a lot of research, I'm really not sure if Bianca was infected by the outsiders this early in the series, if at all. Pride is known for making people do really stupid things. And people love to blame others for their bad behavior. So it's possible that the outsiders used pre-existing bad blood between Harry and Bianca to further its plans. but it's just as possible that they had a more direct hand in the conflict. In the book Cold Days, Lily does imply that Kravos was infected by Nemesis. Kravos was a warlock who was working with Bianca and Mavra in grave peril to weaken the border between the Never Never and our reality. Kravos didn't necessarily need Bianca's help, but since she hated Dresden anyways, she was certainly a useful ally. Remember the whole Dresden Starborn and Starborns are supposed to have control over the outsiders? That makes him a target. Just in general, the whole are the outsiders and Nemesis responsible for this particular thing happening question is something that deserves a video on its own. But I need to read more books first. Next is that delicious little reference to He Who Walks Behind. So let's just get this out of the way and discuss that time in Stormfront where the Three-Eye user told Harry that He Who Walks Behind is out to get him. The young man looked up at me, and his eyes rounded and dilated, until I thought they had turned into huge black coins dotted into his bloodshot eyeballs. His eyes rolled back into his head until he could hardly have been able to see, and he started to shout in a clarion voice, "Wizard! Wizard! I see you! I see you, wizard! I see things that follow! Those who walk before, and he who walks behind! They come! They come for you!" I know that he who walks behind leaves a mark, but it's really creepy that a non-practitioner could tell what that mark was. Does it look like a flashing neon light in the magical spectrum or something? A callback to the Detective Noir stuff? God, I was trying too hard on that one. Victor Sells, our beloved leader of the Three-Eye Operation and Stormfront's Monster of the Week, is also implied by Lily in the book Cold Days to have been infected. She says that Nemesis destroyed a father's love for his facility by twisting it into maniacal ambition. From conversations with his wife Monica, Harry learns that Victor learned all of his stuff from books. These books definitely could have been left out by Nemesis or one of Nemesis's minions. This probably explains how Victor Sells was able to get so powerful without getting on the White Council's radar until, Stormfront happened. He was using a less powerful version of the Bloodline curse from Changes to end Jennifer Stannon. This doesn't sit right with me because if the Bloodline curse had been cast correctly, it would have taken out siblings and parents with the victim as well. Victor Sells would have lost his wife Monica, because she and Jennifer Stannon are sisters. There are a lot of explanations for why the spell didn't quite work out that way. Victor wasn't powerful enough to also rip the hearts up, which is required for the full force of the Bloodline curse to take effect. Victor didn't care about the consequences because Monica didn't want to get involved in powering up his magic. This is why he had to recruit the Beckits to help him. With their power of love. Another possibility is that Victor might have thought that if he couldn't have Monica, then nobody could. Toxic, but it happens. Victor might not have totally understood what the consequences would be, or he ignored them because he just wanted the Three-Eye to work. This might have been Jim Butcher writing a toned-down version of this curse so he could bring it back in Changes and make it bigger and worse. The sixth and final option, Jim has a plot hole. Next, we have to talk about everybody's favorite gangster, Gentleman Johnny Marcone. Jim said in an interview that Marcone was originally not going to be a big player in the series. Later, when he wrote Marcone's character and the scene where he soul gazes Dresden, Jim decided that Marcone was too good of a character to keep as a small-time baddie. And I agree, he's a lot of people's favorite villain in the series. The Beckits are later revealed to think that Marcone is responsible for the loss of their daughter, which is why they help Victor Sells. As Victor gains territory in his Three-Eye operation, Marcone loses it. So it's hurting his business. Now 17 books into the series, Mrs. Beckett is one of Marcone's employees. And I'm just waiting for her to betray him in a huge way. Like, grab your popcorn, it's going to be a wild ride. And last and probably best is the whole concerns with Morgan, especially with this whole microfiction thing that came out in 2020. I couldn't talk about Morgan and Harry's conflict in Stormfront without thinking about their relationship and how experiencing this story almost through Dresden's point of view completely leaves out a bunch of important details. One of the few good things to come out of 2020 was Jim Butcher's Year of Dresden, which includes microfiction number 2, entitled Journal. You can read this for free on Jim's website. Journal is a journal entry written by Morgan that sheds a lot of light on things that Harry doesn't know about and basically explains why the White Council treats him the way that they do. We're quickly running into this deserves its own video territory, so I'm just going to summarize. This journal entry acts as Morgan's final confession, revealing that he made a promise to Margaret Le Fay, who's Harry's mother, to keep him safe. Harry's father's demise was probably not natural, but given this child's ongoing misfortune, it seems clear to me that he has been marked with an adversary from the moment of his birth. Adversary with a capital A. Remember how adversary is the name given to he who walks beside, also known as Nemesis, so that they don't call him Nemesis and attract his attention? Yeah, that guy. Basically, that's saying that the outsiders know about Harry and they have plans with him, and it's basically started since Harry was born. And oh my god, we're going like super deep. I need to know, but it's probably not going to come out until we get to read the book 12 Months, which is the sequel to Battleground and the precursor to Mirror Mirror, which was supposed to be the next book. But then Jim decided to change that. And then I looked kind of dumb in one of my other videos and people commented about it, and I'm just salty about it. But yeah, it's going to get good. Harry presumably beat Justin Dumorn in a duel, but it might have been a cover. Apparently Morgan doesn't like Justin Dumorn, and he thought that he was on the outsider's side. And that, guys, gals, and non-binary pals, is why he thinks that Harry's gone to the dark side. Morgan thinks that Justin was trying to raise a monster. Harry's fight with Justin appeared to make him break the first law of magic, which would have let Morgan end him. But McCoy saves the teenage Harry through the doom of Damocles. So Morgan does everything he can to try to get Harry to show his true colors and to break and go past whatever act he's trying to do to look like a good guy. Morgan wants to see the real Harry, and he's expecting the worst. This explains why throughout the series, Morgan is very adversarial and confrontational with Harry, and basically tries to fight him all the time. Morgan does say that he might have become overly paranoid given what's at stake and wronged a good man. This probably explains why he saves Harry at the end of Stormfront and gets the doom lifted from him. And by the end of Turncoat, Morgan doesn't know if he did the right thing. And he basically says that history will judge him, but he wants everybody to know that he did his best and tried to do the right thing. Perhaps I've been too hard on him. Perhaps I really have become paranoid and mad. Perhaps I have wronged a good man. But there is too much at stake to take that chance. The thought of allowing a destroyer to be birthed among us, when I could have stopped it, is too heavy to bear. To those who come after me and read this, well, history will be my judge. Morgan says this near the end of Journal, describing his conflicted feelings on if Dresden is a good man or an overpowered baddie in the making. He capitalizes the word destroyer, which is what Aurora calls Harry in a conversation that they have on Summer Night. In that conversation, the word destroyer isn't capitalized, but it's used to describe Harry's track record so far, and to describe his tutelage under his godmother's care, Leah. Definitely a destroyer type. Leah, the destroyer type Pokemon. Definitely out to break things. Looking back at the encounter between Harry and Morgan we talked about in the book only section, the one where Harry has to outlawyer Morgan and prove he didn't actually break the laws of magic, the scene takes on a deeper meaning. Morgan was trying to push Harry to go warlock on him, and Harry demonstrates that not only does he know the laws of magic, but he respects them and he tries to follow them. Harry has the ability to go to the dark side. We've already talked about that. But he chooses not to, and that's huge. Alright, so that's my deep dive into Stormfront. This has taken me way too long to get out onto film or iPhone video, whatever we're calling it nowadays. If you have any thoughts or feelings about this type of video, please leave them in the comments down below so that I can do my video on full moon better. And if you like what I do, please hit the subscribe button and join the Caffeination. We'd love to have you. I plan on doing a lot of discussion videos. I'm covering Dresden Files, I'm reading Malazan right now, and I am also doing the Cosmere books by Brandon Sanderson. For this Dresden series, I really want to do a video on each book, and I'm kind of scared of how it's going to turn out, so help me out. Like, share, subscribe on all your social media platforms, and if you think that I suck at this whole booktube thing, leave me a comment down below and I'll try to suck better next time. Bye!